All right, scrap in, everyone. Today's deep dive, well, we're going right to the heart of some seriously thought-provoking stuff.
Oh, I love it already.
So picture it, right? It's 1938, Paris is bustling, but the whole world is kind of teetering on the edge of war.
Tense times.
And right smack in the middle of all this is G.I. Gurdjieff.
Oh, an interesting character for sure.
He was this, well, let's just call him an unconventional spiritual teacher. And he was holding these super intense meetings with his students.
So what do we have to work with here? Some kind of firsthand accounts?
You bet. We have transcripts of these meetings, and let me tell you, they are just jam-packed with insights into human nature. And, of course, that quest for what Gurdjieff calls the real I.
I'm intrigued.
So, ready to see what wisdom we can unearth from these conversations?
Let's dig in.
Awesome. Now, what I find so striking right off the bat is that Gurdjieff wasn't shying away from all that chaos at the time.
Interesting.
It's like he was saying, okay, yeah, the world might be going crazy, but let's get our inner worlds in order first. What do you think?
You know, I think there's a lot of truth to that. He wasn't afraid to dive right into the human condition, right in the middle of all this external turmoil.
Exactly. And you know what? His ideas, I think, they resonate even more strongly today in our own crazy times.
I think you might be right. It does seem more and more relevant today.
And one of the things that really jumps out at me from these transcripts is this idea, it's kind of a head scratcher at first, but to actually conquer your ego, you need to start working for the benefit of others.
That is a bit paradoxical, isn't it?
Definitely.
It's so easy to get caught up in thinking of self-improvement as a solo mission, you know? Almost like a selfish pursuit. But Gurdjieff, he really flips that on its head.
I agree. And there's actually this passage where he's talking to a student who's, really wrestling with egoism. And Gurdjieff basically says, look, go find a new challenge. Find something bigger than yourself and work for it with all the same intensity you felt for your own parents.
That's powerful.
I know. He's not just talking about, like, being nice to people. He's talking about a real shift in focus from me, to something with a much larger purpose. It's fascinating, right?
It is. But how does that actually, work in practice? How do you actually go from, like, totally self-centered to selfless?
Well, that's where Gurdjieff brings in something he calls conscious labor and voluntary suffering.
So not just any old effort, you're saying,
Right.
but a very particular kind of effort.
Yeah, he was saying that real, deep down internal change, it requires us to kind of push against our comfort zones, our automatic reactions, all those ingrained desires that we all have.
He's talking about intentionality, isn't he?
Yes, like choosing the harder path, the one that really challenges us to grow. And there's this great story in the transcripts about a student who's doing some kind of exercise.
Oh, I think I remember this one.
He's complaining. Says he feels like a donkey dragging a heavy cart uphill. Saying it's too hard.
And what does Gurdjieff say?
His response is just brilliant. He says, it is because in you, other parts are touched.
That's so perfect. She's basically saying all that resistance, that feeling of struggle, it's a good sign.
Right. It means you're actually engaging parts of yourself that have been, kind of dormant, untouched. Like, think about it. Haven't you ever felt that kind of resistance when you're trying to, I don't know, change a habit or learn something new?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, for example, when I first tried to get into a regular meditation practice,
I can imagine.
It felt like my mind was like this runaway train. But you know what? The more I practiced, the more I could kind of, calm the chaos.
Is that kind of what Gurdjieff was getting at?
Exactly. And this leads us to one of his big central teachings, the development of the real I. He describes it as this, like, unwavering center of gravity within us.
Almost like an anchor.
Yeah, like an anchor. And he actually says this to a student. Actually, everything in you is in a state of change. Unstable, inconsistent. You are the carriage with many chance passengers. Then he says, you must acquire an unchangeable I.
Powerful, right?
It is. It's like he's saying, okay, look, amidst all this noise and change, there's this solid core within you that you need to discover.
And cultivate.
But how? How do we even begin to find that unchangeable I when everything around us, even within us, feels so fluid and unpredictable?
Well, Gurdjieff wouldn't be Gurdjieff if he gave us a simple answer. He was constantly pushing for conscious effort in literally every aspect of life, from how we read a book to how we observe our own thoughts and feelings.
So it's not about these grand gestures or intense retreats. It's about really bringing awareness to even the smallest actions.
Precisely. There's actually an anecdote where a student is struggling with just reading a book.
And what did he say?
Gurdjieff tells him, read one page at a time, engage your head, your feeling, your experience.
Wow.
He was really insistent on breaking us free from passivity. He wanted us to bring this whole new level of presence to even like the most mundane stuff. I'm seeing a real pattern here. It's like he's saying, wake up, like stop sleepwalking through life.
Right. And that actually brings us to another key practice he emphasized, self-observation.
Self-observation.
Yeah. And he was really specific about how to do this. He wanted his students to just observe themselves, but without judgment. Just become aware of their patterns, their reactions, their thoughts.
Like taking a step back.
Exactly. He even suggested, like, keeping a notebook. He says, make a little notebook, make a record, write down, but do nothing.
Interesting.
It's about creating space for what he called impartial analysis.
Yeah.
You know, let those thoughts and emotions surface without immediately trying to change them. Have you ever tried something like that? You know, journaling or tracking your thoughts?
I have dabbled with journaling, but I tend to either censor my thoughts or try to analyze them right away. It's hard to just observe.
It is a challenge.
But I can see how valuable that could be.
Yeah.
You know, to just see yourself more clearly without all the usual filters.
Absolutely. And you know what? Through this process of self-observation, we actually start to see the roots of our automatic responses. And Gurdjieff, he was all about breaking free from what he called automatism. You know, there's like deeply ingrained habits and reactions, the ones that kind of control us without us even realizing it.
Right. There's that analogy he uses where he compares a student to like a mechanism controlled by external forces.
Powerful analogy, that one.
He says, you must have contact with something, but you have contact with nothing. So that everything has contacts with you, you are a slave.
It's kind of unsettling, isn't it?
It is.
When you really think about it. But I guess that's the point, right? How much of our lives are we really in control of versus how much are we just, you know, reacting to external stuff or our own programming?
It's a big question.
It is. But I think there's also something exciting about it, don't you? Because if we can become aware of those automatic patterns, maybe we can start to, you know, choose differently, break free from that sense of being a slave to our habits.
Yeah, but how do we actually begin to do that?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And, you know, Gurdjieff, well, he really seemed to love giving his students the tools to actually tackle these big questions.
He did. He seems to have had a real knack for, I don't know, cutting through the noise and getting to the heart of the matter.
I agree. And one of the most, I don't know, intriguing concepts he introduces is this idea of playing a role.
Playing a role. Wait, how does that even work? I mean, shouldn't we be, you know, authentic, true to ourselves? How does playing a role even fit into all this, like, self-discovery stuff?
It does seem kind of contradictory at first glance, right?
Yep.
But Gurdjieff's take on this is, honestly, it's fascinating. He's basically suggesting that to really work on ourselves, we need to, I don't know, create a little bit of distance from all those, you know, habitual patterns we've been talking about.
Okay, I'm listening. Tell me more.
There's this one passage where he tells a student, act in life as though playing a role. Externally behave as you always have, but do it consciously without identifying with your actions.
So it's not about, like, changing our outward behavior, at least not at first, but more about changing our relationship to that behavior.
You got it. It's about creating space. Space between our inner world and all the demands of daily life. And in that space, well, that's where we can start to observe ourselves more objectively. You know, maybe see those automatic reactions a little more clearly.
So instead of just reacting out of habit, you're saying we might actually have a choice in how we respond.
Exactly. It's like, think of an actor on stage. You know, they're fully inhabiting a character, but they always know, deep down, that they're not actually that character.
I like that analogy. But I can also see how that would be a real challenge, you know, to be present in the world, engaging with everything, but also maintaining that inner separation, that awareness.
Did Gurdjieff ever give any practical advice on how to actually do this playing a role thing?
Oh, he did. He did. And some of his advice is actually surprisingly practical. Like, for instance, he talks about the importance of not letting anyone know you're doing this inner work.
Really? Why not? He says, you should be like actors, seamlessly inhabiting your roles while simultaneously undergoing a profound internal transformation. No drama, no big announcements, just subtle, consistent effort.
Like a secret mission. An undercover operation for interchange. I love it. It takes the pressure off, it's not about having to perform some idealized version of yourself for others. But it also makes me wonder about motivation. If no one knows you're doing all this work on yourself, how do you stay committed? How do you keep, showing up for the role, so to speak?
Well, Gurdjieff was pretty adamant that the motivation, it had to come from a deeper place. It had to come from that longing for the real I, that desire to break free from the limitations of our, mechanical selves. He wasn't about external rewards or validation. He was all about inner transformation, the journey of becoming.
So it's all about the process, not the outcome. Is that what you're saying?
In a way, yes. But he also recognized that we can't do this work in isolation. He talked about the importance of finding at least one other person who was genuinely interested in these ideas, someone who could be a companion, a guide on the path.
So this is where the idea of working in a group, of having a community of like-minded individuals comes into play.
Exactly. It's like having he compares it to a French president.
A French president?
He says they'll do all the work for us.
Okay, having a personal French president to handle all my self-development work does sound pretty appealing.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm guessing he's speaking metaphorically here.
Of course. It's really about having someone who understands, the challenges of this work, someone who can offer support and accountability when we inevitably, stumble or get discouraged. It's about creating a space where we can explore these ideas together, challenge each other, encourage each other to keep going.
Makes sense. It's like having a workout buddy, but for your soul.
Exactly. It's about sharing the load, knowing that you're not alone on this journey.
I like that. It actually reminds me of something else that Gurdjieff talks about.
Yeah.
This idea of conscious labor and voluntary suffering.
Mm-hmm.
He believed that real change requires effort, a willingness to push against those ingrained habits and desires we were talking about earlier. Mm-hmm. And having a community there to support us through that process, well, that can make all the difference.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that transformation isn't always comfortable, but that the discomfort, well, it can actually be a sign that we're on the right track.
Right. It's like that feeling of resistance we were talking about before.
Exactly. And, Gurdjieff also talks about something else that I think is really fascinating. He calls it decrystallizing our attachments.
Decrystallizing attachments. Okay, that sounds intriguing, but also a bit cryptic. Can you break that down for me a little? What does he even mean by that?
It's about really examining those emotional dependencies we form, the ways in which we become bound to others, to ideas, to things. He suggests that true freedom, it actually comes from letting go of these attachments, from becoming, in his words, absolute egotists.
Absolute egotists. Wait, isn't that kind of the opposite of everything we've been talking about? This idea of, working for the benefit of others.
I know. It sounds like a contradiction. But I think it's important to understand the context here. He's not advocating for a callous or heartless approach to relationships. He's talking about a specific kind of inner work, a process of detaching ourselves from those emotional dependencies that, they cloud our judgment, they limit our freedom.
So it's not about becoming emotionally shut down or cutting ourselves off from other people.
No, not at all. It's more about cultivating a different kind of relationship, one that's not based on need or dependency.
So it's about recognizing that our attachments, even those that seem positive, like love and respect, can sometimes hold us back.
Exactly. They can hold us back from seeing others clearly, from relating to them authentically. He's encouraging us to question those attachments, to see how they might be shaping our perceptions and, ultimately limiting our freedom.
That's a powerful challenge and one that feels super relevant today, don't you think?
Yeah.
We're constantly bombarded with messages about connection and belonging. But how much of that is, genuine connection versus how much is driven by a need to be liked, to be validated, to fit in? It's something to really think about.
It is. And Gurdjieff, he wasn't afraid to ask those tough questions, to push his students and ultimately us to confront those, uncomfortable truths about ourselves.
So he was all about pushing us to grow, even if it was uncomfortable.
Absolutely. But he didn't just leave us hanging with these big, challenging ideas. He also offered practical tools for navigating this, this inner terrain, for cultivating a more conscious and intentional way of being in the world. And one of those tools, which we touched on briefly earlier, is this idea of creating what he called automatic factors of recall.
Right. Those little reminders that we embed in our daily routines, the ones that help us stay present, To remember our aim.
Exactly. It's like creating a bridge between the busyness of everyday life and those deeper aspirations we have for ourselves. He uses simple examples like noticing which foot you use to step into the shower or which hand you use to pick up your toothbrush.
Such simple things.
I know. But he believed that these seemingly insignificant actions, they could actually become really powerful triggers for self-remembering, for connecting with that deeper intention we've been, cultivating.
I love that. It's like hacking your own brain to create these little moments of awareness throughout the day. But how do we choose which actions to use as triggers? Is there a specific method, or is it more about just finding what works for you?
Gurdjieff definitely encouraged experimentation, finding those actions that felt resonant and meaningful for each individual. But he also emphasized that it's not about adding more to our, already busy lives. It's more about finding those existing moments in our day where we can just pause, take a breath, and connect with that inner stillness.
Like finding those tiny cracks in the pavement where a flower can push through.
Exactly. We don't have to overhaul our entire lives. We just need to find those small opportunities to inject a little bit of consciousness, a little bit of intention into the everyday flow.
I like that. It feels doable,
It is. And you know what? Through this consistent practice, those little moments of awareness, they can actually start to expand, weaving themselves into the very fabric of our lives. But Gurdjieff also cautioned against becoming too rigid or too formulaic in our approach.
So it's not about creating a strict set of rules to follow.
Right. It's more about cultivating a way of being that's both, grounded and responsive, awake to the moment, but also guided by a deeper intention.
Like learning to dance with life, rather than trying to control every step.
Beautifully put. And, that brings us back to Gurdjieff's core message, this idea that true self-transformation, it requires conscious effort. It requires a willingness to question our assumptions, to push against our comfort zones, and to engage with life fully with all its, complexities and contradictions.
It's a lifelong journey, isn't it? A constant process of discovery, refinement, and integration.
It really is a lifelong journey. And Gurdjieff's teachings, well, they offer a pretty unique roadmap for navigating that journey. One of the things that really stands out to me is how he emphasizes conscious effort in every aspect of life, even something as simple as eating.
Oh, that's right. Wasn't there an exercise where he had his students eat alone in complete silence?
Yeah.
And really pay attention to every single sensation.
Exactly. It was like turning an everyday activity into this mini meditation.
Right. He wanted to snap people out of those mindless routines and bring a new level of awareness to even the simplest things.
Exactly. And I think there's a passage where one student describes how this exercise helped him see his, what he called avidity. Yeah. That kind of unconscious rush, that hunger we bring to our meals, almost like we're seeking solace in food.
I can relate to that.
Right. But then he goes on to have this even deeper realization. He asks himself, what I eat is part of nature. Who created this nature? Who created what I eat?
Wow. That's really profound.
Isn't it? That simple act of eating consciously, well, it opened up this whole new dimension of awareness for him, this sense of connection to, something much greater than himself.
I love that. It's like that moment when you realize, you're not just this isolated individual, but part of this incredible web of life.
Exactly. And it echoes that idea we were talking about earlier about working for the benefit of others. It's about moving beyond that self-centered perspective and really recognizing our place within a much larger whole.
It makes you wonder, though, how many other opportunities for these, micro awakenings do we miss every single day? Because we're so caught up in our routines, our thoughts, that constant internal chatter.
Right. And Gurdjieff offered a really powerful tool for addressing this, something he called the cultivation of a second current.
A second current. Okay, now I'm intrigued.
He describes it as this inner life that we cultivate alongside the flow of ordinary existence, almost like a fish learning to breathe air.
That is such a vivid image.
It is, but how do we actually cultivate this second current? Is it about, finding more time for meditation or spiritual practices?
Those things can be helpful, right?
They can, but Gurdjieff really emphasized that the real work happens in the midst of life, not in retreat from it. He talked about creating those automatic factors of recall that we discussed, those little triggers embedded in our daily routines that remind us to be present, to remember our aim.
Right. Those little seeds of awareness that we intentionally plant throughout the day.
Exactly. But what about those times when we're not actively triggering those reminders? How do we keep that second current flowing even when we're, caught up in the whirlwind of everyday life?
Yeah, how do we do that?
Well, that's where the practice of playing a role really becomes essential. By consciously choosing how we act in external life, by maintaining that inner separation from our automatic reactions, we create the space for that second current to flow more naturally.
It's like we're building a new set of lungs,
Yeah.
a whole new capacity for breathing in that different element.
Yes, I love how you put that. It's really about bridging that gap between our inner and outer worlds,
Mm.
between our aspirations and our actions.
It's not about escaping from the world or trying to force ourselves into some, idealized mold. It's about bringing a new level of awareness and intention to every aspect of our being, from the smallest gesture to the most, profound inner transformation.
Beautifully said. And as we wrap up this deep dive into Gurdjieff's world, I don't know, I'm left with this feeling of gratitude for his unique and challenging perspective. He didn't offer easy answers or quick fixes. He challenged us to really confront ourselves honestly, to embrace the work of self-discovery, and to cultivate a way of being that's both deeply personal and profoundly interconnected with the world around us.
It's a legacy that continues to resonate, to provoke, and to inspire. And I really hope this deep dive has, I don't know, sparked some new insights for you, our listeners, giving you some new questions to explore. And maybe even a renewed commitment to that ongoing journey of self-transformation. As Gurdjieff himself might say, the work begins now.